We work with farmers with impairments and help them get tools and ideas and get them on the right mindset, thinking about how they can continue doing their farming operation, continue working on the huge investment that they have, and continue making a living. And yeah, so that's kind of in a nutshell what we do, but it provides so much more than just that living and income. You know, one day you're farming along and everything's going well, looking good, baby lambs. That's my husband, by the way. And the next day, something happens and yeah, everything goes sideways. Or maybe you were born with something, or you had an accident and things just change. And of course, as we get older, our bodies don't work as well, and things that we really don't think of as a disability, and they really aren't, they're an impairment. Things like arthritis creep up and impact the way we can farm. So no two farms are alike. There's livestock, crops, orchards, vegetables, dairy, timber, nurseries and greenhouse, fisheries. We also work with fisheries. Livestock does include bees, of course, and insects and whatever. So there's so many different kind of farms, but we are able to go in and address and help you assess and make some decisions about how you can keep doing the work that you do. So lots of different types of disabilities. Could be from an illness. Aging is the big one in the ag community. Injuries, farm accident, vehicle accidents, burns, vision, hearing, stroke, chronic pain, things that people deal with continually, heart disease. That's just an example. I mean, people come in and we talk to different people here, and they're dealing with some impairments that it's like I haven't even encountered before. It's like, wow, it's like this is such an inexhaustive list. There's so many different types of impairments, but the process begins, and I don't have a picture of Ned here, but we have an engineer who is also an assistive technology professional. He's in a very niche market, okay? He is also a farmer, so he has combined this whole area of assistive technology professional, which is a very specific certification, kind of rare, I think, agriculture and engineering, and has put it together in a really productive and fascinating and beautiful way that really helps people. Again, and it's kind of a niche group of people that we're working with, but he does a great job of this. I should back up a little bit and say a little bit of history about AgrAbility. It's been around for 30 years. It's a program of USDA. We are grant funded. We're a partnership between Easter Seals and MSU Extension, and we're kind of housed at both places. So we've got just a number of people. It's not a big staff, 3 of us with boots on the ground, 1 MSU Extension person. So it's who we are. We cover the entire state. Yes, ma'am?
Are there others in other states?
Yes, there are about half of the states that have AgrAbility projects. Okay, so I think there's about 22 or 24 right now. So, but that being said, if we get a request from a neighboring state, we will also do what we can to provide services for them. So we kind of share people and do what we can. We may not make a site visit, but we will definitely do what we can to help. So how the process works in a nutshell: Ned goes out, does an assessment, helps you figure out some ideas. He'll go back home, sit down, write out some thoughts, write out what you could benefit from, and go from there. Sometimes farmers put these things together themselves. Sometimes they're really simple. Sometimes they're more complex. Funding them can be complicated, or it can be simple. The simple things are really, a few dollars. Adam is going to talk about more complex cases. He was an AgrAbility client a couple of times, had more complex and more high dollar assistance. So when you talk about that, if there's things that are lower dollar, we do have some donation funds that we can help with things like tractor steps. That's a big thing that we put out there, steps to put on tractors that we can kind of fund ourselves through donor dollars, and backup cameras, grab bars to get into skid steers, small hand tools, things like that. So those are some things that we have donations from. And I should plug here, the Alpha Gamma Rho fraternity at MSU does a fundraiser. They do a beef preview show, and they get, it's over 400 kids at the MSU Pavilion. They bring in their starter calves that they're working. They're doing all these jackpot shows, and they show their cattle. They just had it the first weekend in February. They had over 500 head, and they are going to write us a check from the proceeds of that for around $25,000. It's huge. If you think about young college guys putting this together and handing us a check for $25,000. And it's also the single largest philanthropy project for that whole Greek system. I think there's another fraternity that maybe does more total, but they do more events. So it's kind of a big deal, and I always like to plug them. But here's just a before and after picture. Picture of a tractor seat that is crap, that looks like the tractor seats on our tractors at home, which, by the way, we are actually going through the process of working with NED and MRS right now as well, versus a new air ride seat. And, the benefits of that in a long day on the tractor, doing hay or whatever, working in the field, the exhaustion and the soreness of joints and just that recovery time is really difficult on a body. So the difference between the first and the second is going to make a huge impact on that person's next day. This was a young man that we worked with some years ago, Matt Liebetru. He lost an arm in a baler. He got caught up. It was a plug up. He was unplugging it, and all of a sudden it gave and it pulled him in. And his dad was nearby enough that he got there. They called the emergency services. He actually talked them through undoing him, getting him out of there while he was caught in there, but did lose he lost it below the elbow. But they had cattle, and he's also an electrician. He also had an off-farm job. So every day out to the field on his on his four-wheeler, but he had to operate it in it was kind of a challenging manner. He was, again, one of those people that we helped with some bigger ticket items. We helped him get a John Deere side-by-side. He did add the cab, and but one-handed steering. I mean, what a difference, really. And this is a daily, twice-a-day task that he'd be out in the cattle pasture. This is just an example of a hitch lift that keeps the hitch up so that it can be more easily attached to, you can back right into the hole. If you're a good tractor driver, a good backer, you can get right in there and you don't have to back up, go forward, back and forth. And I think this is probably attached to a quick hitch as well, and simplifies it, eliminates getting off and on the tractor. This is at a farm where the farmer's been in a wheelchair since he was like 17 years old, 18 years old, and now he's in his 60s. So he has developed so much of this stuff on his own. Ned particularly refers to him a lot for advice and guidance in what works and what doesn't work. Another example, this is on the left is a lift that is a hydraulic lift that was installed on this tractor, gets this individual up on his tractor. And on the right, you can see the extended handles that he can use. They're hand clutches now. So instead of having to use a foot-operated clutch, he can operate the clutch by hand and the brakes. So great for him. He can still do some work. He's paralyzed from the chest down. You know, so not only is it physical, but there's a mental aspect here that can, you know, I'm still able to do something. I still have some worth. I still have some value. I am contributing to my family's income, well-being, and everything else. Okay, so that's the long and short of it. You can find us on Facebook if you're on social media. We have a website, MichiganAgrAbility.org. We have a YouTube channel with a lot of different items on it that you can see in action. National AgrAbility is also on there. I don't have it up there, but National AgrAbility has a great website with a toolbox that if you just go to the toolbox, it's www.agrability.org, and look for the toolbox, and whatever type of farming you're doing, there should be a tab for it, and there's all kinds of ideas in there for assistive technologies to use on your farm and how you can use and adapt things. Great ideas. So it's very helpful. And a lot of times farmers can take these ideas and run with them and build their own, you know, okay, what works, and this little thing might not quite work for me, but if I change it just a little bit, it'll perfectly fit my situation. So the other thing I just want to mention is we help promote a farm and rural mental health program through Easter Seals that is available for farm family members. Stress and anxiety and those things are very real. This is free counseling that is available. There is a number, 1-800-75-SEALS, S-E-A-L-S, that takes you directly to the Easter Seals office, and you can tell them that you are seeking farm mental health assistance, and they will connect you with a counselor. Again, it's free counseling, who is a farm person. She was brought up on a farm. I think her family still does farm. So she really has a heart and an understanding, and she is a certified counselor with Easter Seals. So mental health help available as well as physical. So, any questions? Yes, ma'am?
You mentioned that the donations you get can cover smaller cost items. Where does money come from to cover the larger items?
Well,
I'll talk about that.
yes, Adam will talk about that. So if you need something like a lift to get on a tractor or a combine, are you going to talk about like how not everybody qualifies for MRS? I'll just let Adam explain it. But excellent question. Okay, any more questions? And we take donations from our website too. Anybody can donate. You know, that's kind of our big donor, but we do get smaller donations throughout the year, a few $100s there, a few $100s there. So
I got a couple little things I'm going to cover. So we'll cover a little bit about beekeeping accessibility, but first I want to start with just talking about my own personal experience of working with AgrAbility. I've been an AgrAbility client twice in the last 10 years. The first time that I reached out to AgrAbility was right when I started working here in the state of Michigan and found out about their services. And I'm a disabled vet, so I was discharged from the military for an ankle and knee injury. And as a beekeeper, with my primary responsibility, a lot of what we do is lifting and twisting constantly. And so we're constantly carrying heavy things, we're constantly moving over rough surfaces, and I was just hurting myself every single year. And so every year I'd end up with a bad back injury that I'd be in bed for a couple weeks, and obviously as a farmer during the season, that's a really tough thing to have happen to you. So when I found out about AgrAbility, I reached out and we started kind of working with Ned, and Ned came out to my place. We did a full assessment over what my disabilities were, what my needs were. He watched me work in the apiary and really made some amazing suggestions for us. And as Bevitt said, some of these suggestions are high dollar items, but a lot of them are really not. A lot of them are just things that you do behaviorally that change how you work in the space. But just for example, like one of, I think, the coolest accessible items is this weightlifter's hook that we use in beekeeping for a lot of things. So you have arthritis in your hands, bee boxes get really heavy, you can use a weightlifter's hook to take all of that weight off of your hand. I do maple syrup too, and so 5-gallon buckets walking through the woods carrying sap. This is a great way to take things off. And this is like a $15 accommodation. This is not a $20,000 accommodation. So a lot of these things, yeah?
Take the mic off and put it on the table. It'll be fine.
Absolutely. So a lot of these things are not super high dollar items. It's just things that we don't normally think about as individuals. So after that first assessment and going through that process and having some of these really neat technologies to be able to use, one of them was a telescoping table, so I didn't have to bend over so far. That was really nice because now I didn't have to bend down every time I was carrying a heavy box. But 2 years ago, in 2021, I was involved in a really bad car accident. Suffered a traumatic brain injury, had damage to my auditory nerve. I lost most of the hearing in my right ear. I just recently had fusion on my neck. And one of the big things that happened from that car accident was I no longer can operate vibrating equipment. So we have a 40-acre farm. We did not own a tractor. We kind of prided ourselves on not owning a tractor and being able to manage that kind of land. But every piece of equipment I had was walk behind. My tiller was walk behind, my snowblower was walk behind, my string trimmers were all gas string trimmers, my chainsaws, all of those things. And I can't operate any of them anymore because of the vibration. It brings on vertigo, and I'll be vomiting on the floor within 20 or 30 minutes of operating a piece of equipment like that. And so when that happened, I knew exactly who to call again, which was AgrAbility, to come out and help me. And Ned came out, and this is where the bigger ticket items come in. So I'm a full-time farmer. This is my job. I mean, this is how we make our livelihood, is working on the farm. I now could not operate any of my equipment. So my wife, who is a very petite woman, trying to be out there operating all this equipment, which normally is manhandling me and now is manhandling her, we were really struggling. And so Ned came out and did an assessment, and one of the things, so the way it works when you're dealing with these higher dollar items is that oftentimes Ned will work, or AgrAbility will work with Michigan Rehab Services. Michigan Rehab Services is through the state of Michigan, and they're there to support individuals who are going through these transitional phases in careers where they have had a disability that in some way impacts their ability to do that job. For us, it was farming. And I'll be real honest, if I did not have AgrAbility in my life, I would not be farming right now. It wouldn't just not be possible. And so Ned came out, did a full assessment with us. It was very apparent at the time what I was dealing with, and I was still having slurred speech and things like this. I was still going through speech therapy and learning how to walk properly again. But it was very clear that there were a lot of issues. One of the big issues was I could no longer look over my shoulder anymore. And so we started going through this assessment process, and it became very clear that this was going to be a very big ticket item in order to fix this. And essentially what the recommendation that Ned came up with was that we needed to get a tractor and we needed to get implements to replace all of these walk behind things. And it wasn't just a tractor. We needed a tractor that had low vibration, low decibels, had a cab on it. We needed all of these things. So Ned recommended that. And when he recommended that, we started working with MRS. And MRS has a program, Farm Rehab Services, which is specifically a fund that's set aside for individuals who are farmers with disabilities. And we went through that process, and we ended up, they didn't pay for the whole tractor. We had to pay for the tractor, but they paid for the implements to replace our walk-behind equipment. And it changed our lives forever. I ended up selling off most of our walk-behind equipment. Now the stuff that we still have, like chainsaws that I can't replace with a tractor, we've gone to electric. But we've tried to replace everything that I couldn't use. And it was invaluable. And it was a very large purchase from the state of Michigan. They invested a lot into us. But that's the type of process that this really affords individuals. It is a real opportunity to recapture what you feel like you lost. Like when I was in that car accident, going through 2 years of rehab, I mean, I at many times felt like I'd lost my entire life. And that's really difficult for someone who spent 30 years working in agriculture. It's the only career path I know. And to have that pulled out from under you is really tough. So they really are, AgrAbility is an amazing service for anybody working in the agriculture industry. And like Bev said, it's not just individuals with disabilities. There's a lot of things that go with aging as well. And so, none of us are getting any younger, and it's really nice to have services available, even if it's something as simple as this, that can totally change your ability to work on a farm. All right, so that's a little bit about my own personal experience. And out of this whole experience, we started working with Ned a little closer on how can we help other beekeepers. And so what I'm going to talk about just here to kind of wrap up today is a project that we've been working on now, and Bev and myself and Ned have been writing articles for Bee Culture Magazine, which is one of our industry magazines, to help individuals with disabilities that work in beekeeping kind of understand how we can be safe on the farm. And this, I think, goes for everybody working in agriculture. It's not just beekeepers. So the things I'll talk about are not just related to beekeeping. And I have a handout up here, which is the publication that we started this all off of and kind of covers all of this, which is what are your site considerations for having a safe apiary to work in if you're working with disabilities. So let's kind of talk about that a little bit. So what are the common characteristics of apiaries or farms in general? Well, most of the time they're in rural locations. So you're away from medical facilities. A lot of times when you're out in the fields, you're away from structures. You're on grounds that are not always maintained, like they're not flat, consistent surfaces. A lot of times they're bumpy. And you may be far away from your parking or your vehicle. So if you get hurt in a situation, like, I want to point at a slide screen up here, but it's in front of me. Oh, it's over here. So if you're looking at like a situation like this, where you're in that bottom picture and you're working in an apiary that has tall grass and you can't see where the bumps are, and you're carrying equipment out there or moving bees, tripping hazards are huge and you can get really hurt. And if you're out there by yourself, that's a real dangerous situation to be in. I mean, farms are dangerous places. And if you're in a situation where you get hurt in these areas by yourself, that can go sideways really, really fast. So what do we need to do in order to make sure that these sites like apiaries are safe for us and this is for anybody, not just folks with disabilities? Well, when we're looking at the goals of making something more accessible, what we're really trying to do is reduce the risk of secondary injury. You've already got something you're dealing with. The last thing we want to do is compound that by an injury in the field. We also want to provide a safe environment to work that's supportive. So somewhere where most of the risks have been taken care of and that you can be in a safe environment. The other thing that I really, really focus on is using planning to address or eliminate a lot of the hazards that are out there. So addressing the challenges before they ever happen. Just think about, this is the situation I'm in, this is where I'm going to be, how can I mitigate some of these risks before I get myself in those situations? So one of the things that I always like to talk about with farmers when you're thinking about like working in an ag setting, one of the most basic is how do you get to the place you're working? And so one of the minimum things that we try to do when we're selecting sites to put bees on is I want to make sure that I can get right to them with my vehicle. I don't want to have to carry my equipment 300 yards to get to bees, because by the time I get to those bees, I'm tired because I've been lifting all this stuff or I've been pulling it all out here. And in that 300-foot space, there's a lot of risk for injury over that space. Whereas like in this picture, if I can just pull right up to it and unload, all my stuff is right there. I don't have a lot of movement that's going on. I'm not really expending a lot of energy as I'm getting there. The other thing that's really important when you're dealing with anybody, where you're trying to eliminate hazards, is the level surface. So making sure that you have the surfaces that can accommodate any kind of mobility devices maybe that you're using. So if you're wheelchair bound or you're using a walker or a cane, making sure that there's level ground that's compact that those mobility devices can move over is really important, because you want to make sure that you're not putting yourself in a tenuous situation. And like I said earlier, parking any distance away from your site that you're working on and having to move things, it's just increasing your overall work. So trying to limit that as well. Soil types are things that I don't think a lot of us think about when we're thinking about accessibility. I live in the Upper Peninsula. Right now, if you're on the east side of the Upper Peninsula, it's pretty much just mud everywhere. It's solid clay, and anywhere you put anything with wheels is going to sink right now. And so thinking about where you're doing things and what soil types you're on is something really important when you're dealing with disabilities. The last thing you want to do is get stuck in the mud or have trouble moving because, well, you're gaining 2 inches every time you take a step on your height because all that mud's collecting on there. So making sure that the soil types are work for your needs. And that can be augmented. You can do cover crops and maintain them at a low height so that there's at least some surface, a crop on there. You can also use things like mulches, like this individual here in this apiary has put a bunch of mulch down so that there's a solid surface there for them to be able to move on. Sand soils, as long as there's coverage on them, they tend to be fine as long as they're pretty compact. But your ideal soils are going to be well-drained soils that are compact. And so one of the things when we're thinking about that in surface conditions, not only is it soil type, but it's also what's on the surface. So making sure that tripping hazards are removed is pretty simple. This is something also for folks that are running any kind of farm operation or community garden operation where people are coming out there. You definitely don't want tripping hazards because that is a big liability for you. So making sure your weeds are managed, making sure all of that top vegetation. This is a picture from one of our old apiaries, and you can see there is nothing but solid vegetation around these hives. Getting in here is a pain in the butt, and working in here is a pain in the butt. And it is a super hazardous situation because you can't see anything below any of this. I think this is Dame's rocket here. So something to think about. If you're working on grass, making sure that it's cut short and that you collect your grass clippings. So like those big wads of grass that come out of a mower that a lot of times even the park services don't pick up, those are tripping hazards. Those are hazards that you're walking over. Holes are a big one. I have a terrible right ankle. If I hit a hole, it's over. And so making sure that holes are filled, stumps, roots, things like that. If you are going to go to the trouble of clearing an area that has vegetation, make sure you're getting all of those little nubbies up too that you leave behind. That are, the little tree you're just going to take with a pair of loppers. Well, that little stump can be something very dangerous if you leave it there. Now, you can also get even more fancy when it comes to like the surface preparation, and you can see here there's several different types of compact surfaces that you can use to really make things safe. And this is, if you've got the money to put weed exclusion cloth down under an apiary, this is a great accommodation. You can level the surface before you put this down. There are no tripping hazards here. This is a very nice surface to work on. There's no weeds. You don't have to make, the nice thing about it is you don't got to go around the beehives with a string trimmer because the bees generally don't like that too much. So you're saving yourself that as well. So you can use things like weed cloth. I've seen people use decking, milled asphalt, compact gravel, all sorts of different materials that you can use for surface preparation. Even the milled, not the milled asphalt, but the rubber pieces that you see in like playgrounds and things like that, I've seen that as well. So all sorts of different options when it comes to making a safe surface. For us in the beekeeping industry, the biggest problem that we have, and there's actually a term for it called beekeeper's back. And it's basically like I've been lifting heavy boxes my entire life, and now when I'm 65, this is what I look like. I'm working with a beekeeper in Canada right now who literally can't, he's 65 years old and can no longer lift his bee boxes. It's impossible because of his back is so bad. And so thinking about ways that you can prevent that, if you're working in the agricultural realm, especially with the public, raised garden beds are a prime example of like how we can mitigate back injuries. So bringing garden beds up high so you don't have to work so low. Same thing with beekeeping, and we use hive stands to kind of mitigate that a little bit. And these are things that can be really customized to whatever height you need. So like the individual that's here on the bottom right here, he's got a hive stand that he's made that he can also just set his hive bodies down on, so he's not doing the deep bend down when he's moving things. The one on the top is an example of a very dangerous situation. This is an old bee yard that we had, oh goodness, over 10 years ago. And you can see that these are just pallets that are stacked up on one another. Now, that may seem fine because I was trying to get high enough so I didn't have to bend over, but the problem is when those boxes get full of honey, you were talking 200-300 pounds on that thing. And if you get a little tippy on those pallets, that can come over on you. So making sure that the things that you're using are safe as well. It's one thing to get creative and make accessible technologies on your own. It's another thing to make sure that they're safe. because we all can get in, a little engineering mind to us, but that's really where like the professionals at AgrAbility come in. And I know Ned works with farmers all over the state, and I've been working in agriculture my whole life. Farmers are ingenious when it comes to adaptive technologies because it's all out of need. If I got to do something, I'm going to find a way to do it. But making sure those technologies that you develop are safe. That's what Ned is really great at. So if you even come up with your own kind of an adaptation, having someone that's a professional be able to look at that and say, yeah, that works, or maybe we should tweak it this way because you might hurt yourself doing this with that. Now, we in the beekeeping industry, like I said, simple accommodations like a weightlifter's hook. Another kind of simple accommodation that we use is just changing the hive style that you work with. So going from like a 10-frame hive that's using deep hive bodies that you see on the left, which is traditional style of beekeeping here in the United States, to just using medium boxes. So they're smaller boxes, so they weigh less. That's a really easy accommodation. We also work with other hive styles. So, there's different ways to crack a nut. And here in the beekeeping industry, we use things like Aja hives. This is a hive that doesn't require any lifting. You work it from the back. And so you never have to lift a heavy box. This is the traditional hive from Slovenia. I'm actually heading over there in April to learn more about these hives. Top bar hives, long Langstroth hives, Lands hives, just alternative hives that we can use that don't require all the lifting that our traditional hives here in the United States use. Spacing is another thing that we deal with in the beekeeping industry as well. So how you space your beehives around. If you're in a wheelchair or some sort of using a mobility device, you don't want these things right next to each other. You want to have enough room to move freely and not get kind of congested in the bee yard with a bunch of beehives. This is one of our training apiaries, and you can see all the hives in the back are on 5-foot spacing in all cardinal directions. So there's always 5-foot spacing around them. But the other thing that we've started using since we worked with AgrAbility the second time and got a tractor is now we have forks on our tractor. So instead of moving beehives, what we've started to transition to is what you see in the front, which is running 4 beehives on a pallet. Now, instead of having to move an individual hive, I can just go scoop up 4 hives with my tractor and move them wherever I want. This is how beekeepers in commercial operations work, as they work on palletized equipment. Mainly because of the scale that you're working at. Nobody's going to want to lift 440 beehives off of a semi-truck. You want to be able to do that with equipment. So that's what we've started to transition to. Not only have we transitioned to a lot of our beehives being on pallets, now all of our equipment that we store, all of these boxes that we have, thousands of boxes, are all on pallets. So I never have to lift anything. If I need to bring beehives or hive bodies out to an apiary because I'm putting more on for bees and honey flow, I just pick up a pallet's worth and bring it right out to the apiary. I never have to lift anything. It has been a godsend for us to be able to have things like that. Another thing, and I always try to put this in when we're talking about safety on farms, is first aid and making sure that you have a first aid kit. If you're working with venomous insects, EpiPens, hot environments, cooling cloths, and water are always available. I think one of the most important things from a disability aspect that I've learned working with Ned is the planning part of it. Making sure, an ounce of planning is worth something of prevention or something. So there's some phrase, you all know what I'm talking about, but basically trying to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success and not putting yourself in a tenuous situation. So an emergency action plan, things like if you're working on a farm and you're way out in the middle of nowhere, identifying where the closest hospital is. And so in case something does happen, you're not on your phone in a remote location trying to get a cell reception when you need to find a hospital. You know where that hospital's at, it's identified, it's written down. Identifying where cell coverage is. Most of my apiaries have no cell coverage because we live in the UP. So what happens if I get in trouble? I better hope that farmer has a landline or I know where there is cell coverage. Support members, always let somebody know where you're at when you're working on a farm. I don't care if you're on your own farm, if you're out in the back 40, or if you're right close to the house, someone should know what you're doing and where you are at all times. Because if something does happen, I know my wife Lacey, if she knows that I've been out collecting sap in the woods and I don't come back in 2 or 3 hours, she knows something's gone wrong and she knows where to find me. So making sure somebody knows where you're at. One of the things that really kind of surprised me when I first started working in agriculture is this knowledge of where we're at. So I can call EMS and tell them the address I'm at, but I could be on a 2,000 acre farm and be completely away from the homestead. And so having identifiers to know where to send EMS, cross streets, things like that, where you say, hey, I'm at this cross street, that you can get EMS there quickly. Having a description of that written down is really important, and then emergency contact info. For you, in case EMS does come out and you need to get a family member contact, maybe you are not conscious, but having that information, like the ICE in your cell phone, the in case of emergency number, those types of things. So in summary, accessible apiaries, and accessibility in general is really for everybody. I don't think when we talk about accessibility, it's never like, yes, these are things you should be thinking about if you have a disability. No, these are things that everybody should be thinking about because none of us are getting any younger. None of us are getting any more able. We're all aging, and we all are dealing with these types of things for the most part. Planning helps to ensure a safe experience for everybody. So whether it's you or somebody you're bringing out, planning ahead to make sure places are safe is a really good idea. And simple accommodations can make a big difference. Like this accommodation, I went over to Bev's table today because I've been trying to find these, and they luckily had a pair that they gave me. But this accommodation right here, this weightlifter's hook, I don't care what area of agriculture you're in, you're always lifting something heavy, whether it's a pot of soil or a bucket of sap or a bucket of honey or hive bodies. These types of like simple $20 adaptations can make all the difference in the world if you're dealing with arthritis or hand issues. Really huge. And then supportive environments, well, they just make work fun and safe for everybody.